If you know, so one body, anybody, Cleopatra, whatever, has so much carbon atoms. So after you change into, okay, carbon gas, hydrogen atoms, and you cover whole, suppose it's covered whole Earth equally, then how many carbon atoms of you will be found right here? It's 1 trillion carbon atoms per square meter per person. That's amazing, right? This is just simple fact. Anybody can calculate. So this is a fact that we are always going back and forth. We are using atoms among our lives on Earth, has been doing like that, and will be doing like that. So we are eternally living, not just by us, but as a whole. We have eternal life. So that's, I have one conclusion. I have a couple of messages. Science now has bridged atoms and life in my way, saying, for the first time in human history. I think this knowledge should be shared by all people in the world. It was a good, it's the scientist's role to do this. And this will not impair any concept in philosophy nor any religion. This is independent. This is just the fact that you're using the same rules that your medicine, everything is made. You cannot deny that. And another suggestion, message, this simple fact is important because it's already invading some dogma of Christianity, for example. But this is just a simple fact that you have to admit. So I think this should be not invading Buddhism, Jain Buddhism, Jain, of course, as we have discussed today. It's a difference from European philosophy on this. And so I think this should be a common platform to admit, for everybody in the world to admit, irrespective of their religion's background. Because this does not invade any of your life or belief. And I hope this is actually a meeting for environmental science. I'm not talking too much on that. But this way, I think we should have the common ground to discuss, understand each other. And I see it, this is the only clear way, at least, it's not the only way, but clear way that we share knowledge in present-day society, irrespective of where we do, irrespective of what science, what belief, what religion we belong to. It's nothing to do with it. It's just a simple fact I'm telling. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Please continue, sir. I invite Professor Skoog to talk on China views on environmental responsibility. Please.
Before I start, I just wanted to quickly do a favor for a colleague, my former teacher. He's looking for someone who's lost in India, or he can't find him. I'm sure he's not lost, but his name is K.K. Chakrabarti, pretty famous scholar. Anybody know who he is? Anyway, if you think of where he might be, let me know, and I'll convey that to my friend Karl Potter. All right, let's get started here. I've been informed I'm reduced in time. Imagine that. But anyway, so I'll go as quick as I can. I've been told also that I'm hard to understand because of my American accent. So subsequently, I have put pretty much everything I'm going to say on the PowerPoint so you can read along as I'm talking, and so you can imagine you're understanding me and as you read or something. Well, I'm kind of going to skip over this pretty much because, time is, I lost 5 minutes, so I've got to cut somewhere. This is, but it does set up what I'm going to try to do in the paper, so I'll mention it briefly. A number of years ago, I was at a conference in Harvard. Eventually a book came out, but the version of this paper, older version, was given at that time. But it was a big discussion then whether even talking about Jain ecology made any sense, or Jain environmental ethics, because after all, there was no environmental ethics at the time of Mahavira, so how can there be now? But anyway, as you see here, it's pretty easy to get rid of that. I mean, obviously, most positions, most philosophers, and religious people have certain views about nature. You can easily reconstruct a view about that from those teachings, and so that's what I'm going to be doing, partially anyway, is going through and talking about what Jain position would probably be, and by doing that. So I'm going to do this mainly by technique, where I'm beginning with kind of a quick survey. Let me turn down the volume a little bit, and also get rid of the reverb. I'm not in a well. I'm sitting here. So anyway, the point here is I'm going to be talking about, real quickly, laying out the different views about nature or environmental ethics, and then seeing where Jainism would fit into that, and then finally doing kind of an overall evaluation of all these positions and showing where Jain stands in this process. All right? Okay. So here's kind of the spectrum I'm laying out here, from ethical egoism to deep ecology. If you haven't heard of these terms, then I'll try to go through them very quickly, but this is really what I'm going to be basing my paper on. And I kind of drew out kind of a spectrum where you start on the left-hand side with ethical egoism, which basically they say that if something is going to help me personally, then it's a good thing to do that in terms of environmental activities. If something is going to harm me through, this environmental activity, then it's a bad thing. So it's all geared on me. Give me what I want. If you step over a step, you get to the anthropocentrism, which says that whatever is right is what's good for humanity as a whole. So it's a bit of a broader individual saying whatever is good for humanity is right thing morally, whatever ethically, whatever is bad for humanity, we shouldn't do in terms of the environment. This is probably about 80–90% of the people in the world follow this position. Okay, so not very sophisticated. Again, it's kind of an extension of this ethical egoism. But if you've been watching the recent discussions in Paris and the Accord and whatnot of Obama and others, world leaders that talked about, it all is still geared towards how it's going to impact humanity. There's no talk about animals, no talk about plant life, ecosystems. It's all talking about humanity. Okay, moving one step further over to the right, again, you have sententialism. Sententialism goes a bit further, expands it even further, and says all sentient beings, all conscious beings have rights. So if you do something that's going to harm sentient beings, it's wrong. Otherwise, it's okay. Okay, so the big distinction here is an anthropocentric view. It says animals have instrumental value, that if they're going to help humanity by eating them or by using them for experiments or whatever, then they have some value, otherwise they have no value. Whereas with sententialism, it says they have intrinsic value. Conscious beings have intrinsic value. You cannot use them for your own purposes unless they're willing subjects. Okay, vitalism is the next one. This is mostly attached to Albert Schweitzer. It's a bit more extreme. It says all life is sacred. That is God's presence in all these different things in the world. Therefore, we have an absolute duty, well, pretty much an absolute duty to respect life and all aspects of nature. The only exception is that for vital needs, for survival, you have a right to harm nature, but very, very strong. And finally, deep ecology, we're almost down here, that says we extend morality to the soil, the waters, to even the atmosphere. So it looks at a biosphere, ethically it looks at the biosphere. Anything you do wrong will be something that would be, anything you're going to harm the biosphere in terms of some aspect of it, you're going to harm something. So again, it stresses biodiversity, saying that you have to understand there's a diversity of all living life, and each part of that web is vitally important. So if you mess up one part, it's going to mess up some other part. So it tends to see nature as a whole. I think it's a very holistic view. So where is genism in this picture? Ta-da! I put it kind of in the middle there as radical sententialism, meaning that, again, all life has value. There's no harm should be done to them. So the idea here is, unlike conventional sententialism, which again picks out a few animals like whales, dolphins, apes, elephants, so on and so forth, and says they have rights because they're conscious, Jainism has a more radical view in this form of sententialism, including all life forms down to single-cell negotiators. Okay? So it's like sententialism, but much more radical, much stronger in terms of the inclusion. I would say Jainism is not a part of vitalism, because Jainism does not have any theological principle like all life is sacred or something. That it depends. It makes us. It depends. Its views depend on, and it's not also the same category as deep ecology. Why? Because there's no direct concern for jivas or unconscious beings. Okay, so rocks and dirt have no concern ethically, morally, for Jains, except for, I say indirectly, except for there are living beings in that matter. Therefore, we shouldn't harm those things because of these beings that are living in these components. All right. So why? I guess again, it's very short on time, but I just argue why this study is important is because why study Jainism at all in terms of this topic? Number one, Jainism for 3,000 years has proved to be a very successful, nonviolent, ecologically aware community. And secondly, Jainism, as standing apart from the rest of the Western views, gives us a perspective in which to judge them. Okay. Ahimsa. Obviously, it all begins with ahimsa, so let me go through this really quickly. Any Jain environmental ethic begins with the observations of nonviolence. Not a big surprise there. Ahimsa is directed only towards sentient beings, as we just said, not non-sentient. Yet there is indirect observations of nonviolence to a non-sentient world, again, by having living things within those, in the dirt and the other parts of nature. Also, ahimsa is not absolute. Where destruction of life is unavoidable, then you must kill a being with less number of senses. Okay, we don't really have time to get into that. I'm sure most of you know about that already, but I just want to make that clear. So many people define Jainism as pacifist. That's not quite true if you take the definition literally. Okay, exploration and evaluation here is pretty much the last section of the paper. Again, I'm trying to keep on time for respecting other living beings here that are going to be talking soon. But I'm going to be basically looking at three things. Keep this in mind as you follow along, hopefully. What I call internal coherence, external coherence, and moral reasonableness. What do these mean? Okay, internal interest, meaning that a view has to be sympathetic or at least aware and try to satisfy internal interests of the doers, of the agents, namely their instincts, their avoidance of pain, their seeking of pleasure, certain beliefs they have. All these things must be kept in mind and try to be satisfied if the ethical system, the environmental ethical system, works pretty well. Also, you have external interest. Here you have the preservation of the welfare of living beings that exist in the world. So how do my actions affect those people, good or bad? Finally, one needs to ask if the ethical position is reasonable. Is the position workable from a practical point of view? So keep those three things in mind. How does it affect me internally in terms of my emotions and feelings? How does it affect people outside or beings outside of me? And third, is it a reasonable way to go about setting up a national or international policy, when I say, on environmental ethics? Okay, the first position we'll take on here. Ethical egoism and anthropocentrism. These are the two on the left-hand side, you might remember. Obviously, they do very well with making personal interests satisfied. If I'm satisfying myself, if I'm satisfying all humans, that part is good shape. The problem is, what about everybody outside of me, the rest of the world? If I'm doing what I want to do, and you aren't allowed, then that doesn't allow you to do what you want to do, then there's going to be a conflict. So, again, there's great tension and violence in the agent's interaction with the surrounding world. Each party's effort to fulfill their own individual goals displaces each other's needs, so dispute arises. You can also expand this point of view to talk about groups of people or host species, collection of individuals, and if they're exploiting someone else at the other group's detriment, then again, that's usually referred to as speciesism, where one species dominates another species. Okay, so those first two we see inherently have problems because they're very insensitive to the rest of the world. They're exploitive. We all know that. What about the ecocentric view? These views were created to basically avoid that kind of problem that we see with ecocentric. Yet the problem arises at an internal level as inherent instinctive directives for self-preservation and personal advancement do not cohere with ecocentric. In other words, I might help other people and do all these things in terms of, say, deep ecology, but what does that do to my own interest? It curtails my fulfillment of my own interests. So there's, again, an inherent tension. So these internal conflicts present real dilemma to the individual, as either to suppress their own instinctive drive for preserving and improving their own life, or if they do that, then they give up everybody else. And harm them. One last thing I want to say about deep ecology, it provides no real method of transformation. Again, it has a very noble position in terms of recognizing all aspects of the biosphere as being important and of respecting all aspects of the biosystem. However, it doesn't really give you a means to transform yourself to do that. I mean, intellectually, you can appreciate this, but how do you actually fulfill that from day-to-day life? Jainism and other individual schools like Buddhism here, thought integrates and in fact emphasizes personal transformation alleged to come from meditation, yoga, compassion, reflective contemplation. So Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism, schools of that sort do provide a means, whereas deep ecology just says, wouldn't it be nice, but doesn't tell you how to really live the life, how to walk that walk. It only tells you how you should walk, I guess you might say. Okay, now we get back to Jainism again, and Ekatananda, or mental multi-perspectivism, seems to work very well in terms of integrating these two apparently opposing forces that have been tripping up the other schools of thought. If you incorporate it into egocentrism, what's good for me, nonviolence position is best thing for personal growth and liberation. In other words, you realize that living a life of nonviolence and living a yogic life actually is the best thing for you, and so that helps to curtail these egoistic tendencies that are counter to progress and to ecology. If you also incorporate multi-perspectivism into ecocentric and worrying about the world, there's no being, then you recognize no being wants to suffer, instead increase happiness and harmony for all beings, not just oneself. Regarding external coherence, the Jain practice of ahimsa covers a broad domain including all life forms, areas of the earth, and life exists in even the most remote areas. So it recognizes a very broad perspective of what life is, where life is. In terms of internal coherence, it is also maintained as personal interests are not necessarily mitigated to preserve outside entities. So again, there's some flexibility. There's no greater happiness, no greater personal advancement than progress and eventual attainment of spiritual awakening. You know, the sonum bonum, so to speak. Self-preservation is not excluded, as practitioners of ahimsa are permitted to defend themselves in Jain tradition when necessary. So it's not, again, absolute. Traditional versus Jain sententialism. Problem with traditional, we're going through all the different views, right? So the one left we haven't talked about is sententialism. And what I'm saying is traditional sententialism is looked down upon by many because it's too limited. In fact, deep ecology refers to sententialism as shallow ecology. They're deep, this is shallow, so it's kind of a derogatory reference. So again, Jainism resolves that by bringing in a lot more than just traditional ways. Okay, summary. Okay, maybe I'll do something different. I mean, I'm hoping you have a general idea of what I'm talking about now. I'm saying that Jainism avoids most of the pitfalls of the other traditions, other approaches, by not having to assume so much and not giving any preferences for anything else, but rather gives a very broad perspective and balances out the competing forces of internal interest and external interest. So I just summarized that, you know, in so many things here. Let me go through what is going to be a last little hurrah here, but maybe it's going to be a one minute wonder here. What I was going to say is that some ecosystems encourage readers to practice what they accept, particularly deep ecology. If you buy into deep ecology, then you've kind of committed the rest of your life to promoting, you know, deep ecology and living a life of deep ecology in terms of minimum problems. So how do we, if we can make Jainism, how can we make Jainism and the Jain community an active participant in ecology? In other words, it's not just if you buy into what I'm saying or you see Jainism as a great resource for living a life of ethical responsibility in terms of the environment, how do you go about doing that? Well, the first thing is take not sure it'd be the sixth vrata, but it would be, anyway, a vow of minimal carbon footprint. I mean, there's many things that we all know about in terms of recycling, about, you know, changing our thermostat, about, you know, walking versus riding or taking public transport. But anyway, you know, by taking a personal vow to do all these things and then stick to it, that's the first step you can do. You can make an effect on your environment that way. Then you eco-convert, that's my word.